Hi class, I'm going to make a video announcement for this week so that I can talk a little about the stories that have been assigned to you. So for this week you should be reading 4 stories. One is Hills Like White Elephants, and I'm just having you read that. It's very short so that you can then watch the close reading video that I have provided about that story so that you can see an example of me close reading through the story if you're interested in doing that. There are content warnings for the other stories, the Borges, the Carter, and the O'Brien, which are the 3 options you have for your close reading paper. So please read those content warnings. If you have concerns, let me know, or make sure that you're focusing on your paper on one of the stories where the warnings don't concern you. I don't think there are any warnings for Borges, but hopefully you'll read them all and will be comfortable with that. Also, please watch the lecture on summary versus analysis. It's really important that when you're doing close reading, you're avoiding just simply summarizing the story and you're doing some close, careful, specific analysis instead. You're also going to go in and look at the presentations that half the class did last week and comment on someone else's presentation. Make sure that you're commenting in Blackboard on the wiki and not out on YouTube or SlideShare so that when I go to grade it, I'm able to find those comments and locate them within the Blackboard environment. And then you're also going to start working on your first close reading paper. So take a really good close look at the assignment sheet, print that out to refer to, and start thinking about what you'd like to write about, either Carter, Borges, or O'Brien. And you can always send a thesis statement to me. I can take a look at it. And then you're going to do a voice thread, which is going to give you an opportunity to talk through what you're going to write about, your thesis statement, all of that. If you have trouble with VoiceThread, please let me know. I do have an instructional video up for how to use that program. So I want to talk quickly through some of the stories that I had you read. I had you read basically 3 kind of examples of basically contemporary writing. Borges was published in 1941, putting it kind of on the cusp between modernism and postmodernism, but it's very representative in a lot of ways of postmodern literature. And we usually consider contemporary literature in the world of literary studies things post-World War II, post-1945. So I've given you 1 American, 1 British, and 1 author in translation. And if you're studying literature, you usually choose a path where you're going to study British Lit, you're going to study American Lit, or you're going to focus on comparative Lit, which would mean learning to speak the other language that you were going to study so that you can look at the way things are translated. Since word choice and things are so important, translation is iffy business when it comes to literary study. Okay, so the first writer is Carter, and she's a British writer. She published the story you're reading in 1979 in probably her most famous collection of stories, which is called The Bloody Chamber. She is known for rewriting fairy tales and folk stories with more of a focus on the female protagonists, and sort of bringing back some of the original aspects of the fairy tale, right, which is that they are often grotesque and very frightening. And the original, Grimm's Brothers fairy tales or Perrault fairy tales all have these elements of the grotesque. But in our society, when we turn them into these moral lessons for children, that we sort of Disneyfy them, and we lose some of the original grittiness of the tales. And she's in some ways bringing that back, and also shifting the focus in what some would say is a feminist way to focus on female desire, female intention in the stories. So The Bloody Chamber is a rewrite of the Bluebeard fable, and if you are interested in intertextuality and you do want to do a little research, that might be a good way to go. It's not the only intertext. For instance, the Marquis is an obvious reference to the Marquis de Sade. And she also has, the intertextual influence on her style, right? She's really writing in sort of a Victorian Gothic style. If you've read novels like Rebecca Does the Same Thing by Daphne du Maurier, or if you've read Dracula or any of the actual Victorian Gothic novels, she's taking from the style of those and actually taking from some of the characters of those. It's really easy to get lost in the deep dark well of all of her references, but you don't want to do that. So stay really focused on an aspect of the style if you choose to go that route. The setting is also important, and it's playing a lot with Victorian Gothic conventions if you're interested in that, and the setting may also be symbolic. What parts of the setting are symbolic for the interior of the protagonist's mind, perhaps? That's another way to go, is focusing on the symbolic nature of the setting. And of course you can go other directions directions than the ones I'm talking about. I'm just talking through some of my ideas. So that's Angela Carter. And then we have Tim O'Brien, and Tim O'Brien is the American author that I've included, and he published this story in 1990 as a part of his book, The Things They Carried, which is really kind of a novel, but is often anthologized as a series of short stories. It's kind of both. It's a really interesting book. I would recommend reading the whole thing if you enjoy his writing. The initial impulse might be to talk about his biography because he is a Vietnam veteran. He does write about his own experiences, but it's not really necessary for this type of assignment to look at that because it's not helpful in terms of close reading the way that I'm asking you to do it to say that this may or may not be memoir. Although it is interesting in that it's wondering whether or not it's true, and truth as a theme in the story is huge, because this is really a story about how we choose to tell stories, what we choose to include or not include, and what it means for a story to be true. Is that factual truth? Is that happening truth? What happened? So that's interesting as a theme, and then also the point of view and narrative voice. Who is this narrator? What is the narrative? What has this person actually witnessed? What part is this person playing? From what perspective is the story being told? And then the other thing that, of course, stands out about the story is the water buffalo story, and the water buffalo story is sort of like a little microcosm of the whole story. So it's interesting to take a look at that story and say, what does the telling of just this one part, this one really emotionally affecting part, say about the telling of the whole story, which has different layers, right? Because then it's the story of what's actually happening in Vietnam all around that, and then it's the story of what happens when the narrator comes home, and so it's like these concentric circles of storytelling where they're all standing in for each other because they're all about telling a story. So that one's really fun to untangle, and there's, it's an incredible story, and an incredible book, one of my favorites. And then we have Borges, who was published in 1941, so the earliest. He's an Argentine writer, so the story is in translation. So there's a lot going on with style, and style in translation is always interesting because you're not reading it in the original language, but there is a lot of particular word choice. And then there's also the question of who is the narrator, right? What is the point of view of this story? Where is the story being published? There are footnotes, but they're not footnotes from the editor. They're maybe footnotes that are part of the story. So it's interesting to look at that style. And then also, the big question is that the whole story is a symbol. What is the library a symbol for? And to unpack the symbolic nature of the library. So just some quick tips for your paper. I'm having problems with YouTube again, and I think it's going to run out of time here in a minute. But stay really focused on the story. Don't try to go outside too much. I did say it was okay to do research. So if you look up the Bluebeard fable or, something like that, that's fine. But try to stay really within the story. Stay small. So start with, I'm going to look at a symbol, and then go deep. Really look at it. Keep asking why, because that's how you get from summary to analysis. You don't want to answer what, you want to answer why. So just keep asking it. Why? And you'll see if you look at my comments on some of your writing so far, is that I've been asking you a lot of why questions. So maybe go back and make sure you've seen those comments. And I think that's about it. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you soon.